Hi, welcome to the September 8th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. I'm going to do a quick audio test to make sure we have audio going through. Bear with me just for a moment. All right, and we'll just make sure. Okay, so audio seems to be coming through nice and clearly, so we'll go ahead and mute that. But my name is Greg Undo. I'm the host for the Hangout today. I'm based in the United States and outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. So if you haven't attended a Club Cubase Google Hangout before, how it's going to work is you can ask questions in the live chat field, and we will try to go through all the questions we'll usually go about 4 hours. We'll try to go through as many questions as we can get in chronological order. You could also send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And then especially if it's a little more involved, where I may need to set up a particular session or scenario or project to answer the question. So you could always submit questions in advance. We try to do these on Tuesdays and Fridays, starting at this time, 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. For those that are watching live, you can feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are, where you live, what version of Cubase you're running. And if you're not watching us live, you may want to skip ahead till about 10 minutes after people get logged in, and we'll be starting kind of going through the questions. If during the questions, if you just want to ask them in the chat field, you can type them in. We'll try to go through chronologically all of the questions. So repeatedly asking the same question in a chat field won't help your question get answered faster. It just kind of slows down the whole process. So if we could try to refrain from doing that, it would be appreciated. Also, sometimes if you could ask, particular features may be contingent on what version of Cubase. So you say, I'm using Cubase Pro 10.5 or I'm using Cubase Elements 8. That information could be helpful as well. And like many people here, I have my family home during the pandemic, so I may have to get something set up for my son. He's just started his virtual learning today, so he may be wrapping up in the middle of the hangout. And you may hear my wife, who's working directly above me, so I apologize for any distractions in advance. But let's go ahead and see who is on the hangout, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. So let me go back over here. All right, so we see Sub 403. He's in Canada. We have Robbie Bowling from Dallas. All right, so we see some questions on Groove Agent. We'll get through. Or you can see Ted Springman from Sherman Oaks, I believe, in California. All right, so we have Millard Brown saying it's a beautiful day there. Yeah, we had an absolutely picturesque, beautiful weekend in Washington, D.C. area for our holiday. So we have Amir from Iran, Rasul from Denmark. We have Agent K, who helps out doing some moderation. Jazz Dude from Heidelberg, I believe, in Germany. So he's very helpful with helping people with comments. All right, so we have Bob from Helena, Montana. I was going to go out to Montana for the first time this past summer, but it got canceled due to the pandemic. It's one of the few states I haven't been to. All right, so we have Michael from Weatherford, Texas. All right, we have India. All right, so we have Harpinder Singh from Baltimore, not far from me. All right, so we have Jan from Stockholm. All right, so we have Jason from South Shields, England. Alex from Stockholm. Alex is offering to show me my way around Stockholm. I'll take you up on that whenever I get back to Europe. I've always wanted to go to Stockholm, so I have a lot of friends there. All right, so we have John from Kenosha. We hope that things are calming down in Kenosha for you with all the unrest and you're staying safe. All right, so we have Colombia, South America. We have Holland. Okay, so there's some more questions on some drum editing. Okay, so we have a couple people, two in a row, Snakel or Snaggle74 and Joss Beats from Germany. Right, so we have South Korea, very late night there. Romania. We have Grand Rapids, formerly from Baltimore. Good to see Jack on the Hangout. All right, so we have Patrick from Sweden. All right, so we'll wait just a couple more minutes and get started. Okay, so we have Rockford, Illinois. Been there many times. Driven through it many times. Come from Chicago to Madison. Still getting some people logged in. All right, so we have Bulgaria. Let's see if we have anyone from Australia on. I know it's like super late there, but so far I think we have 4 continents. We usually have someone that works, a couple people work the night shift in Australia that will join us. We'll wait just a couple more minutes and get started with all the questions. If you guys want to start asking questions in the comments field. All right, maybe another minute or two and we'll get started. And if you haven't introduced yourself, please feel free to. If you have questions, please feel free to. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them as well. Okay, so we have hi from the country upon the north of England. I assume that's Scotland, but I could be mistaken. Okay. So I just see a question. If I may be so bold, are you going to discuss how your DAW compares to the other DAWs of note, Pro Tools, Sonar, etc.? Usually we just kind of show what Cubase does, and we answer questions on Cubase. So if you have like particular questions that you want to see, I don't really know Pro Tools or Sonar, so I can show you what Cubase does, but I don't really know the other programs to compare to. I mean, I know some comparisons stuff, obviously, but pretty much what we do in the Hangouts is just kind of answer questions that people have. Okay, so I see a question on project time. Let's see if there's any more questions to get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with all of our questions. Okay, so from Sub 403, two questions. First question: yesterday, my playhead turned into double lines. How do I fix this? I haven't seen that happen before. And I did a quick Google search on Cubase double lines, and I didn't come across anything, but maybe Sub 403, if you want to send a picture of what it looks like, that could be helpful to me. So if you want to email me a screenshot, and you could probably still do it early enough in a Hangout where if you wanted to send me a screenshot of what your playhead looks like, I could take a quick look at it. But you could email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'd be happy to take a look at it. But I just did a quick Google search, or maybe if anyone else has run across that, but I don't remember and I'm assuming the playhead that we're talking about kind of like the play cursor to play position, like so, that we see kind of moving as I move the cursor. But I don't know of a way, I don't recall ever seeing that be kind of a double line, but it could be indicative of a particular mode. But if you send me a screenshot, that would be helpful. Question: can you create a macro to open the beat calculator and have it ready to tap with just one command? I don't think that there's a macro way of doing so. If we go to the beat calculator, we could set up a keyboard shortcut for the beat calculator. So as soon as we go to our beat calculator here, and let me just see if you... So I'll just see if we can make perhaps a macro of this. So if we go to project to beat calculator, and let me just see if that's a repeatable thing, and see if we can make a macro with the tap tempo. So I will come here. We may not be able to use the tab key within a macro. So when you first open, I think Sub 403's question with this is when you go to the beat calculator, we could use we have to kind of click here in the tap tempo. And then once you have that done, you could kind of tap directly with your computer's spacebar key. So let's see if we could maybe make a macro. So I'll go to my key commands and let's create a quick macro. So we'll say new, and we'll call it tap tempo. And I want to look for beat calculator. And let's try to add that as a command. And then this is where I don't think where we can... Yeah, so if we hit the tab key here, that's not going to be kind of a user assignable function. So you could set it up where you have the beat calculator, and then the transport, the typical function would be just to have the transport follow the space bar. But here you may have to just click on the tap tempo and be able to do that. So there isn't a way to take it directly there. Sometimes, once you're in, you have this dialog open. If you hit the tab key twice, it'll take you to the tap tempo field where you can, where you could then just select that and then hit enter and tap in your tempo, but nothing that would take you directly there because some of the key commands are going to be kind of global per the operating system, unfortunately. Okay. So we had a question. I see it might be retracted now. But just I think it was how to deal with how to get rid of delete overlaps for multiple events, and I'll just answer it for the benefit of other users that may have the same question. As if we had a bunch of audio files that were recorded, and let's say as we do this, I'll activate this project, and the question was if it was actually, so if I come here, we have these tracks record enabled, and now I record on top where we have the events kind of overlapping, how to get rid of the track overlap. So let's say if I have this, and we can see kind of these areas here where we see kind of the two lines indicates that we have events that are overlapping. So if I wanted to select all of those events, you could just go to audio, and I think if you go to advanced, just choose delete overlaps, and then all of those overlapped events will be deleted for you. So if I wanted to still have them lying underneath, but if I wanted to do a delete overlaps, then all those events would be deleted from the project. Okay. So a question. Hi, Greg. Groove Agent 5 is very slow to load as a plugin in Cubase, 2 to 3 minutes, but not as standalone. It's my only VST instrument to act like this, and I have quite a few. Any fixes? Thanks. The one thing that I would try, just out of curiosity, sometimes, I've never had Groove Agent really take long to open like that. But, the one thing that you could try is, it could be looking for licensing once it's in Cubase. I would try to see if you download and install the latest eLicenser Control Center, if that makes any difference. So usually some stuff like that, it may be looking for licenses to do that. But I would try to just, download the latest eLicenser Control Center and see if that makes a difference. And a lot of times that kind of resolves issues kind of like that. Okay, so let's see. We have a question. Greg, while editing two different MIDI parts while layers is activated, how do I trace over my chords a bass line when I hold the Alt key gives me a cut tool instead of pencil? So let's say if I have, I'll just add a couple instrument tracks here. So. Just quickly load up kind of a Rhodes-ish. And let's just make this a quick organ. Okay, so we're going to have two different parts. So we have an organ and like kind of a Rhodes. So let's say if I wanted to, I'll just do some composition for. So now Gareth can make a hit song. Okay, and I will just colorize these events here. So I will take this part so you can see them both. So I'll make it yellow, yellowish, and reddish. And so now when I go to edit both of these parts together, we will choose to colorized by part. So I could see kind of the two different parts here. How do I trace my chords over a bass line? So, if you have your parts, what you want to do is to make sure, and I'll just label these. I'll just call them piano and sorry about that. I'll just call this organ. So now when I'm looking at both of them and I wanted to switch one to the active part, so now I could see my organ. And if I wanted to go directly to my piano part, or the opposite, so say, I guess I labeled these incorrectly, so let me just check. Yeah, so now when all right, so now again, when I go to organ part here, I draw in and I switch to piano. So you could just draw this. So it says, how do I trace over my chords in the bass line when I hold down the Alt key? Gives me a cut tool instead. So, when you depending on, so if you're in the object selection and we zoom in here and you hold down the Alt or Option key, it will cut that kind of as expected. So it says, why is the other part activated while clearly you have selected the baseline MIDI part? I'm perplexed. So make sure that, when you have both parts, that you switch here to, you could see multiple parts, but edit one active part simultaneously. And you can kind of choose which part is the active one there. But if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know, send me a quick comment, and just to make sure that in case I'm completely wrong and misunderstanding. Okay, so question from Ted. Which time stretch algorithm is best to detune an audio track, copy relative to its source track while keeping timings synced up? So if I have a, and it could vary depending upon the actual audio track itself, but let's say if I come here and I have just like a 2-track file, like a mix file, I will take a look at this, and so if I had this algorithm, then I'll just set it to, if it's going to be kind of more complex harmonic content, you may want to use, you'll have different algorithms like a tape, pitch, and time. So these will be your 3 different algorithms. You're going to have kind of more for formant preservation. We could use this maybe more for vocals. We could think time. We have efficient, which will allow you to do more tracks. So it may not be as high a quality of algorithm. So we have kind of like those 3 modes, and within those modes, we have time that favors kind of rhythmic aspects. If it's going to be kind of more complex harmonically, you could do pitch. So maybe if you're doing like a drum and bass, you may want to do time. If you're doing like an orchestral thing, you may want to do pitch. And tape would mimic the behavior of slowing down, tape machines. So if I wanted to come here, let's say I just put this on pitch. And if I wanted to transpose, so if I do this on maybe a different algorithm, let's say the efficient algorithm, you may hear a subtle change. it's down a whole step. Up a whole step. So it could really depend upon the different material that you're using. So some of those, the actual files that you are using may make a difference. So you could kind of experiment, So if it's going to be more dense harmonically, think pitch. If it errs on the side of being more rhythmic, think of time. And if you wanted to do like tape, and this would be like slowing down like a very speed. So as I slow down, you could have that kind of, as I change the tempo, that would automatically change the pitch accordingly. So right now, if I set this to 120 beats a minute, which is not the correct tempo, but as I adjust the tempo here, we could, as we adjust the tempo, this slows down. So as we slow down the tempo, just like analog tape, the pitch would change, and that's when you'd use the tape machine algorithm. All right, let's move on. All right, so going through some of the introductions. Great to see everyone on the Hangout. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a gain plugin like there is in Logic, Cubase Pro 10.5? So I'm not sure if there's a particular gain plugin, but what a lot of people use is on a channel strip. You could come here, and there's gain on every single channel. So if you want to add gain or cut gain, you could do that directly on the channel pre-fader. And you could go an additional 48.2 dB of gain if you want to invert the phase. So that's where you could do. So you'll see it in the pre section. And, you could have your high cut, low cut, as well as your gain set directly there. So if you want it to be 0, you could just, so you don't necessarily have to have a plugin for it. You could just adjust accordingly right there. Okay, reading through different introductions still. Thanks for all. Great to see everyone again. Okay, so a question. Hey, Greg, can you explain the project logical editor when dealing with multiple commands? Example, opening and closing a folder with a specific name and containing a specific media type. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Let's say I want to add number of audio tracks here. And I will put all these into a folder, and let's call our folder drums. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to set a logical editor preset to open up a project logical editor preset, see if we can do this, to open up folders named drum. So let's take a look. I will come over here to my project menu to project logical editor. And what I want to do is, we'll say select, and we'll say immediate container type is equal to folder track. And we'll say name contains drum. And let's say if we want to go to our track operation. Okay, so we're going to say track operation folder toggle. So if I come here, let's say if I do transform. Okay, so if I come, let's say I will duplicate this folder here and we'll call this percussion. Okay, so I have folder tracks that are drums and percussion. So we'll say function is set to transform. At the top for our filter target, we want to say container type is equal to folder track. And for our second condition, we're going to say name contains drum. And then under the action target, we say track operation folder toggle. And at this point, I could just say apply. And if we do this, my percussion folder remains closed because it doesn't contain the word drum or drums. So, or you could say is equal to drums, equal to guitars, or just contains guitar. So if it's drums versus drum, it doesn't matter. So that's how you could do that. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to open a folder that had a specific media type. So let's say if I had an effects channel in here. So let's see if we could do that. Okay, so I will have an effects channel in here. So let's say if I have an effects channel, let's say if I remove this line here, so I'm not sure if we could do it based on it including a particular track, but we could do it definitely by name. So hopefully that will help you. All right, so we have people checking in from Greece and Jakarta. All right, so we have a question from Jan. Greg, do you have an idea how to verify, check a track chain? A track to stereo out is transparent, 0 dB, and also frequency transparent. So I'm not sure if there's a way to determine that, but let's say if I have this track going to a group channel, and this track is going to an effects channel track. So let's say if now I have this channel, let's say it's going to our revelation reverb, it's going to a group track, and I will, so if you wanted to kind of check the routing of that particular track, what you could do is as you click on the edit channel, you can see that this is going to two different targets. So at this point, we could choose, our next target. So we can say, oh, I want to go to group, and you could see if there's any gain that's being added there. We could jump back. We could also just say it's going to my effects channel and jump back to the particular channel here. And you could also just say, it's going, so, and those two targets. So if I come here and say, let's go to the group, and now if I go to the group is going to the stereo out. And you could just kind of go through kind of the signal flow quite quickly to determine, which particular channel is being kind of sent there. So if we just wanted to go up, let's say to our jazz track, as we do this, just, you'll see kind of the destination. So at this point, you click here, it's going to two targets, and you could check any gain structure or EQs pretty quickly using that, but not kind of an automatic, is it being altered in any way that I know of? Okay, so we have a question. When editing drums, start with marking hit points, use combo of auto quantize, cut, manual edit. After, want to export MIDI, can't export MIDI from all slices of a track at once. Bounce, lose hit points. Is there a workaround? So let's take a look. All right, so let's say I have a number of different drums here. So let's say if I'll just kind of duplicate these a couple times. Okay, so these will be different files, and I'll just go ahead and do a quick bounce selection so that these will actually not be referencing the same files. Okay, so now we have, a bunch of different audio files. So let's say if I have now chosen, so let's say if you've gone and done a number of hit points for all these edits here, so I will just go directly to my sample editor. And I'll just do hit points. Okay, so now let's say if I select all three of these and from my hit points editor here, I'll create MIDI notes. So it looks like the MIDI notes are only created for the last section. So let's see if I do. So it looks like, let's see if I do this in so it looks like it's for each event you could do that. But let's say if I glue these together, let's see if that makes a difference. And I'll get rid of these here. So now if they're glued together, it's going to turn it into a part. And let's say, yeah, so it looks like you may have to do it for each different file and do it as a file at once. So, yeah, but I'll kind of mention that and pass that along because it seems like you should be able to do it for kind of multiply selected events. Would make sense. All right, so question. If I record audio at 120 BPM and then import the track via track import to a project that is 85 BPM, why does it change the bar that it was originally recorded at? How can I fix that? Okay, so let's say if I'll revert this project. Okay, and as we listen to this, I'll go to my pool window and we'll say that these are all 100 beats per minute. Okay, so let's say, so I'll do a new project. And let's say my new project is at 120 BPM and I will import an audio file. I think this is, I'm going to try to import track from project. So let me just go over here. This is our project. Sorry, I'll just get to import tracks from project. And we'll choose our Amos Moses track here. All right, so I will now just import the kick track. And as I've done this, okay. So, what you want to do is, if it's matching to the new tempo. Okay, so when you do this, just select this and tell it to play not in musical mode. Select it from the actual event here. And now it's going to play back kind of at the original tempo that's not aligned. So this is our 120 beats per minute is the metronome we hear. But the original file is playing back at 100, the original tempo. But if I put it to musical mode, it's going to play back and change to the time. So just all you have to do is select the events. And from the info line, uncheck musical mode. Then it's going to play back at the original tempo. Okay, so just see why there is no project time on Cubase Pro 10.5. So you actually see kind of the project time here. If you wanted to switch the time format, you could switch it from bars to beats to seconds or to time code, samples, or different frame rates. So you could kind of pick here. I'll just turn off the metronome. So let's say, and if I go to my studio menu to more options, there's also time display. And here you could just see it in absolute time if you want, or various SMPTE frame rates. So you could also see, I didn't line up this drum part to the beat, but you get an idea. So I think that if you wanted to see, your time display, just, again, you could toggle back and forth between secondary and primary time formats here, but you could also go to your studio menu, to more options and just choose time display, and you could have this be just kind of a large time display based on, and by right clicking there, what time format you want. So give that a shot and see if that makes sense for you. I saw a couple emails come in, make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay. All right. So we can move on. Okay. So question, if you drag a one shot from the media bay on a new channel in the project window, sometimes the channel fader is set to the preview volume in the media bay, but other times the fader is at 0 dB. So let's see if we could recreate that. So let's come over here. And let's say I just want kick drums. All right, so I'm going to drag that file over, and as we do that, we'll just look at our fader here. So that all will import it to 0 dB. Let's say if I adjust my fade here, so it looks like, if you have the preview fader, that will kind of carry over into the channel volume there. So, you could, if you want to, just, hit control and click, and that way it'll always be at 0 dB. That will reset the fader. But if you wanted to import at a lower volume, just kind of drag it over. So behavior seems pretty consistent with that. And let's say, let's see if we disable that, if that makes any difference. One of the settings. So if I have this all the way down with that disabled, drag it over, you make a track, that doesn't. But now if we have that set, all right, so I'll just try this. Okay, so let's say I drag that over and we look at the fader. So it seems like it does it until we turn this on or off, and then it works. So I'll play around with that some more, but it looks kind of, let's say if I do a new project. Okay, so let's say drag that over. All right, and let's say if I turn that off. Yeah, so it looks like, it does that until this is turned off. And now I think it's going to play back. It's going to Yeah, so it looks like it might be contingent upon this being turned on. So let's say if I come here, that's turned off. Then now that'll be dropped in. And now we'll turn that on, adjust down. That will be. So it looks like, if this is turned on, that will adjust the volume fader. But if that is turned off, that it will do it at 0 dB. So give that a try and see if that makes sense. Okay. All right, my chat timeline jumped, so let me just scroll back to where I was. Okay. From John Costigan, my MIDI logical presets are grayed out. Logical editor shows no presets. First time I tried the logical editor since Windows update. User error, incomplete 10.5 upgrade. So a lot of times when we see this, one of the things that it could be indicative of is that there's nothing selected. So sometimes some functions don't become apparent unless there's something like, you may not see the score editor until there's MIDI to look at it in the score. So let's say if I come over here and I have a MIDI part, and now I have a MIDI part selected. So right now I go to my logical editor presets. Sometimes, it could be that if there's, let's say if I go to and I have it looks like I've seen some functions when they will show up, or some MIDI functions won't be accessible unless like a MIDI part, so sometimes we see this in the score, that now that I select it, that some of the score functionality becomes visible. What you could do is, if you're, let me just see. So hold down Alt Control Shift right after double clicking Cubase, and you'll get like a little diagnostic mode, like a little recovery mode. So try having Cubase rebuild the preferences. And then that should bring back the logical editor presets. If for some reason they're still not there, you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'd be happy to email you just the logical editor presets for you that you could, and I could tell you exactly where to put them, and they should show up for you. So, okay, so and we had this question we covered a little earlier, but if I may be so bold, are you going to discuss how your DAW compares to other DAWs of note, Pro Tools, Sonar, etc.? So again, these sessions, we have hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so videos showing all the great stuff that Cubase does. So that's kind of how, we, that's, instead of comparing to other stuff. So, I don't know Pro Tools or Sonar, but, but these sessions are really just to answer particular questions that you have on using Cubase. So, and that may be indicative because some of their programs may not have sessions like this where you could get your questions answered easily. Okay. All right, so we have Neil checking in from Greencastle, Pennsylvania. So we have a question. If spreading instances of VST helps core usage, why is it better? Which is better, 4 instances of Groove Agent SE, for example, or 1 instance of Groove Agent 5 using all 4 agents? Again, it could depend on, what you're doing. So like Groove Agent itself isn't a very CPU intensive program. It will take memory depending how many kits that you load up, but it's not like where you're doing lots of CPU calculations, because it's basically firing off samples in a lot of ways. So if you had a problem, and if you had a slow, you had a monster project and you're kind of at the very edge, and you had, 4 physical cores, it would be better to, spread across, having 4 instances of Groove Agent. But, Groove Agent is kind of rarely the problem in a scenario like this. It could be like a big sampler that's doing synthesis on top of that. So, as you're working with that, just kind of be cognizant. Some instrumental like reverbs will take more CPU than memory. A sampler, a sampling drum machine can take more memory than CPU. So, you can kind of spread that across. So, if you're doing that for reverbs, that would probably make more sense. But with, Groove Agent, as you specifically asked in a question, Jason, you may not notice a big difference because it's not allocating memory across the different ones. So, question, how to change the bar numbers at top to show multiples of 4 or 8 instead of multiples of 10. So, it could really depend just upon your zoom factor that you're in. So there's not a way. So here we can see like 1, 9, 17. So it's kind of broken it down. So here I zoom in a little more. It's 1, 17. So this is kind of multiples of 4. So as I go to the next level, and then I think it'll go to measures 1 through 5, 5 through 9. So this is kind of how it's set up as we work with this. So I have my master timeline set to bars and beats. And if I switch this to seconds, this is where we may see, 30 seconds, 1 minute. As we go in, we may see, 20 seconds, 40 seconds, 1 minute. So it usually, as I'm doing it and seeing kind of bars and beats, it's doing it in intervals. I see that's a single bar. As we go to the next level, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a single measure. And now it's 2 measures, 4 measures, 8 measures, 16 to, so it kind of seems to go in multiples of 4 here when you're doing that. So, but it could really depend upon your zoom levels, but it seems like it's, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 here. And in regards to the multiple, like a double playhead line, I'm seeing, Jazz Dudes indicating it might be a graphics bug, and someone else had it with a Windows, after Windows update. So, okay. Okay, so I'm seeing with that, Jazz Dude's mentioning that, yes, Windows does this if you have Windows to zoom to 150% on a 4K monitor, but it's depending on graphics card drivers as well. So best real-time sidechain effect to lock volume contours of one track to another. Okay, so a lot of times it's just going to be, if you wanted it to be, identical, you could link channels together. But if you wanted to, just do, different side chaining, let me just jump to a project where there's some side chaining set up. So the question is the best real-time side to chain to lock volume contours. So, if you wanted it to be, automation, so if you wanted to lock the volume contours, you could, so say if I have this in my automation, so let's say I have volume automation here for this particular track. And if I wanted that automation to be copied, we could select the automation here. And if we wanted to copy and come to this particular automation, and then I could Alt or Option V, and that will just copy that particular automation data to another track. But if you wanted to just do side, and that's without side chaining, so that would be, the same exact data. But if you wanted to do side chaining, let's say if I have a synth, and I'll just turn this down just a little bit, and I wanted that to be side chain from the kick, which is kind of typical like in dance music production. But we could come over here, let's load up a compressor like a VST3, and we want to activate the side chain, and then we could choose our side chain input source. And as we do this now, it'll just so, if you wanted to just, copy the, automation of one track and have that applied, or just be able to kind of control it through sidechain, you could do kind of the same principles. So we have a question. Hello, Greg. Is it possible to run a Ranger keyboard sound, such as a Korg PA3X, without having that keyboard downloading its program to USB flash, for example? So I don't think that the Korg PA3X is going to allow you to download the sounds to a flash drive. You may be able to save presets, but the Korg PA3X is going to be the actual keyboard that's generating it. So you will need to have the Korg keyboard actually. You'll need to have the Korg keyboard actually set. I don't think that the Korg keyboard is going to allow you to download it and play the sounds in Cubase. You would need to send the particular that particular keyboard directly to. You'd need to have that keyboard connected, because the Korg PA3X, I doubt, would allow you that ability to actually have the sounds, just downloaded. You would need that as the engine to play back all of your different sounds. Okay. Okay, so so we have a question. Can you spread your display across multiple monitors, console on one, tracks on another? You could definitely do that. So it's no problem. It's pretty common for a lot of Cubase users to do. I think I have a friend, Jim Corrigan, in Nashville. And he actually, I think he has 9 or 10 different monitors connected for his Cubase setup. So it shouldn't be a problem with that. So you could definitely run plugins on one screen. A lot of people run the project window on one screen, the mix console on a second screen. So no problem. Okay, I see other people kind of indicating that they run that. All right, so question: if I render in place with a longer 1 to 2 seconds reverb on a send, how do I get the full tail in that file too? So let's say if I wanted to come and let's say if I have this particular file. All right, and I'll just bypass the automation on this. All right, so let's say I have this file and I have, and I wanted to add a reverb to it. So I will just come here. Let's quickly add a big reverb. So I'll add an effects channel track to the selected channels. All right, so now listen to it. And let me just go ahead and solo that. Okay, so I'll just come here to the sends and so if I wanted to render that with the tail, I would just go to my edit menu to render in place, and I'll go to my render settings. And as we wanted to do this, we would say complete signal path, and we say tail mode, and I could just say let's add 2 seconds. Let's add 3 seconds. So once you put the tail size in, hit render. And now it will just completely render that particular file in place. So I'll say, okay, we're going to go, I think this would be our rendered file. So at that point, we'll just go ahead and solo this. And I will just not have it do our loop back. So once again, you just go into render in place, into render settings, and that's where you have the tail mode. And that will allow you to set either by bars and beats or seconds how much of a tail is going to be applied to that particular reverb, just like that. That's all you have to do. Okay. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, hope you and your family are doing well. We're doing great, Ace, thank you. With Cubase 10.5, how do I set up a Korg 01W? It has MIDI out, in, through as MIDI controller with Steinberg UR22. Is there a special setting? Thanks. There really isn't a special setting. What you do is take the MIDI out of your of the Korg, so it's a 01W. So take the MIDI out of the Korg and connect that to the MIDI input of your UR22. And as you go to, set, if you do a MIDI track, so say we add an instrument track here, and as you add instrument tracks, it'll just show up as all MIDI inputs, or you could just select from like your Steinberg UR22 port 1, and that would just allow you to play from your Korg keyboard directly in, and that's using your Korg as a controller. If you wanted to have the sounds of the Korg available within your Cubase session, you would just take the output from your UR22 and connect that to the input to the MIDI in of the Korg, and then you would have to have a way of, then as you play, the sounds would come out to your Korg. You'd have to take the audio outs of that into a mixer or some way to monitor that with, if you're using VST instruments as well. Okay. Just going to check something on my end here real quick. Bear with me just for a second. Okay, so let's move on. All right. Hi, Greg J. from Connecticut. Is there a maximum number of monitors which Cubase can utilize for multi-monitor setups? I don't think that there's a maximum. At some point you get diminishing returns because it could take a lot of processing power. But again, I have a friend in Nashville that has, I think, 9 different monitors going at once. And he's kind of very careful with testing and making sure that he has access to all of, that the cards are designed to kind of work together. I think he runs one of the video cards is like a 6-head video card, and he's running different size screens, like 2 4K monitors. He's running like 2 TVs, high definition TVs with some 24-inch or 27-inch monitors kind of all mixed in as well. So it's really more whatever kind of your computer is capable of doing. Cubase will be able to work with, but realize that there can be kind of a processing overhead with that as well. So, all right, good to see Gareth K on the Hangout. Okay, when I'm selecting range selection tool and selecting a range, I want the playhead to be placed at the start of the range selected automatically. Is it possible? And if so, yes. How? So let's see if we can get this going for you. So let's say if I select a range. So it could be if you switch to use video follows edit mode. So just go to your transport, and then you could just select on that mode, and anytime that you select, the cursor will just jump to the beginning of the range selection. So let's just check on a couple other files here. So select a range, it'll just automatically jump directly to the beginning of the selected range for you. So just go to transport and make sure that use video follows edit mode is checked. And then anytime you do a range selection, the playhead will jump directly to the cursor start of the selection. So I see a question. Does maintenance in the e-licenser download the latest version, or do we have to download it manually? I think you would want to download it manually. I think what the maintenance may do is actually, if there's new license databases, that those will get updated, and with some licenses that could be refreshed and handling more like trial versions and different stuff like that. So, but I would manually download the latest one and install that. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Hi, Greg. I've assigned my trim event and left right key to key commands. For some reason, my trim and right key command is not complying to the associated quantized values. Any ideas? So let's go ahead and see if I get this set up. All right, so let me just go to the nudge. Okay. Okay, so I'm just using my my key commands here that are set up for that particular part to trim the end left and right. Okay. It says for some reason my trim end right command is not complying to the associated quantize value. So let's see, like right now I have it set to bar. So make sure that if I set it to use quantize, it'll just come there. So make sure that you have, the grid value here not set to bar, but to use quantize value if you don't have that. So now I have this set to quarter notes. As I trim, it does it by quarter notes. If I have this set to my quantize value set to eighth notes, it's now doing it to eighths. But if this is not set to use quantize, it'll just go to bar, regardless of what your quantized value is. So make sure that, again, this is set to use quantize. All right, I see that my musical inspiration for Gareth's tune was uploaded. So you'll have to send me a link, Gareth. You send it to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Okay, so we have a question. How do you add, say, delay to a selection of a track? Okay, so let's say we'll go back to our little vocal thing that we're messing with. So I will just go ahead and solo this. So let's say, let me just. Okay, so we just have that. I just want to put a delay on one particular range. I'll just select that range here. And you can hit F7. And here, this will open up to direct offline processes. And we'll say, okay, let's add a mono delay. I want it to be, let's say, a quarter note delay. And we could increase the tail size if you wanted to. So it's... All right, so now as we play it, you could just simply have that delay. And I'll just make it a little longer. So now as we list it, and so now you could just kind of process. So if you say, okay, I just wanted to come here and just on that particular section, run a delay. So let's say I want a 16th note delay. So as we, you could do stuff like that. And you could add your tail size there if you wanted to, come here and say, okay, instead of a delay, I just wanted to add a reverb. So you could go to your plugins and just process and say, okay, I want a revelation just on that particular sound. So again, just you could select it, hit F7 or go to audio to direct offline processing, select that particular range and be able to, have just select a particular range and do your processing just on a particular word if you wanted to. Okay. Okay, so we say how to make default track height vertically to 7 whenever I add a new track. So I'll just do a new project. All right, so say if I'm there, I'll have that, and let's try going to right click, and we'll go to our track control settings and see if the height is in here. So let's say if I switch this to 14. Okay, let's just see if we can. All right, so we see the name width is 7. So I think it could also, be dependent on how many tracks. So just see if there's anything else in the track control settings. I think this is where it may be if it is. So you can see that as we adjust this. So that's kind of the width of it. But I think it could also be, so let's say if I add new audio track and I have that as the height, that it will take the height of the track above it. So let's say if I move this and I wanted this to be really big and I add an audio track, so I'm not sure if there's a way to adjust that, but it looks like, sometimes for smaller tracks, it will take, let's say I'll select that track if it'll do it smaller, or that's kind of the default height. I could do some more looking into that, but I'm not sure if it's really user assignable. But I'll play around with it some more. Okay, so I see, hi Greg, is there a way to transfer my IC Pro template from one iPad to another? Let's see if my iPad here has a power to it. I don't know way off the top of my head. I'll see if I get my iPad powered up. And if so, I will see if I could take a look at it for you, Nick. But if not, I'll just go ahead and send you a quick message to see if there's a way. I haven't tried transferring from one to another, from one iPad to another. So. So just seeing a comment. Okay, just let me go back. All right, just reading through comments here. Okay. All right, so I just see from B-Stew says no got elements. Does that do it? So if you could just let me know what particular functions, I'll check. That way I won't have to scroll back. But I'll see if I could clarify that for you. So I see question, will we be getting another 10.5 update before Cubase 11? So I'm not sure when Cubase 11 is going to hit, so I don't know what the process is, but I know that generally, for every version that comes out, there's a lot of bug fixes and little maintenance things that will go into another round. All the changes for one will be applied to the previous generation to fix some of the different issues that may be coming up. But I'm not sure if we'll see a major release, but I don't know what the schedule is. So. Okay, just going through, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great comments. And if you've learned a new trick, please feel free to hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Okay, so just see question. If I add plugins onto the input channel, can I remove them after the take or the take gets recorded with the effects? So if you have added different tracks, different plugins on the input channel, these will be applied to the recording and it can't be undone. So that's going to be fixed, burned into the file. So if you don't want to apply the effects where you can't remove them, that's when you would put it on the audio channel. Make sure that you have direct monitoring deactivated. And at that point, it's not burned into the file. It's just being processed with the file. So if the insert effects were put on the input channel, those will be embedded in the file itself. So I see, hi Greg, is there a way to set the voices in sampler track? So, the sampler track is going to be set for monophonic audio. So if we have a particular So if I have that, we can create the sampler track. And as we do this, we can now just trigger, the sampler track, but it's going to be set where it's going to be just a kind of a single voice that will be playback. So, but once we have this, we could play, chords as well. So. So, but it's not like where you're gonna have multiple samples within the sampler track. That's not really the intention. The intention is to be like super fast and easy to work with. Okay, so hi Greg, how to set voices in both Groove Agent and Sampler Track? Please advise. So, okay. So, and when we're doing voices like in Groove Agent, let me just open up a project here. I'm not sure what exactly you mean by setting up the voices, but if we have, let me just open up in our project. Sorry about that. Let me see if I have this. Yeah, I think this one. So if it's to the point where you're just kind of, dragging audio onto files, if we come here, let's say we have an instance of Groove Agent, just dragging it directly onto instrument pads. So any of your audio files you could set up just to kind of drag, and you don't really have don't think you have a limit on polyphony, but if we come over here, so you could say maximum number of voices would be 128 there. But if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. Okay, so we have a question. How would you go about changing tempo in a song, say starting at 160 BPM, then slowing it down to 120 BPM? So really all you have to do, is just use a tempo track, and you want to tell Cubase to activate the tempo track. So I'll jump to this project, and if your audio is set to musical mode, we can just kind of very easily come over here. Let's add a tempo track. So right now we can say our tempo track is set to 100 BPM, and so at this point I can say we're going to follow, let's say we want it to be 100 BPM. So I'll just say our tempo track. And if I wanted to just like draw in a rotondo, a retard, I could just say, okay, let's just do a ramp. And then just grab my pencil tool and I could just draw in. So now as we play, it'll just... But for audio, all the tracks, you'd have to kind of know what the origin time is and set them to musical mode. And then if you wanted to speed up, then we can have it go really fast. And that's all you really have to do. So you can add a tempo track. And once you're in a tempo track activated, and just kind of draw in your tempo changes. Your MIDI will kind of automatically follow. Audio would just need to be set into musical mode. All right, so we see Vinny checking in from Florida. Okay, so question: when you render in place an audio that's being sidechained from another audio, this sidechain doesn't work. Is there a workaround? Example: bass is sidechained to kick, but when render in place, sidechain didn't render. So I don't think the sidechains are going to carry over into render in place because it's not actually recording that, because that's kind of a separate process. But if you want it to do that, if you wanted to capture that, I'll activate this. And I will come over to, let me just revert this project. They're kind of two independent aspects. So if I have a side chain going on for this particular event, we could send it out to a group and capture it that way. So let's say I'm on my synth, I go to inserts, and so I have this being side chained to the So if I want, one of the things I could do is add a group channel to this track. I've never done this before, but I think pretty sure this will work. And then I'm going to add an audio track, and we'll just call this sidechain bass. And then I'm going to add a stereo audio track. It could be mono if you want. And its input I'm going to set to the group channel. So now as we play, we're going to make sure that this track is being sent out to the sidechain bass. All right, and then I'll just record this. So while it's not capturing it in a render in place, because it's actually kind of a real-time process, I will just kind of push this track into record. So say if I did everything right, at this point I could just so now we listen to this particular audio file. So that's a kind of a quick, easy way of being able to do your side chain that way and be able to print it. So I know it's kind of a real-time process. It's not a render in place, but if you wanted to capture the audio, you could do it like that. Okay, let's just check in, reading through some more questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so we have the Tuba Guy. Hi there, first time in the Cubase Hangouts, and huge thanks. Well, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, don't hesitate, just kind of pipe in and, ask any questions that you have and learn a lot of new tips and tricks. Okay, just reading through different comments. Question, could you touch on MIDI plugin context gate or consider it for a future Q&A video? Okay, so let's check out what context gate. I'm not sure if I've ever played around with this one, but let's give it a shot. Okay, so I will come over here. Let's get to the MIDI inserts and take a look at the context gate. Okay, so let's say if we're in... All right, so let's see if I can... So let's say if we put it in poly mode, so if you want, I will play around with this more. I've never really delved into the context gate, but I could have something prepared for Friday's hangout where we could go over it some more, Ted. So sorry about that. You probably don't want to watch me learn, so it would be kind of a waste of everyone's time. But I'll make a note of that for the next hangout. All right, so Michael Teams is indicating that everyone should spank the like button. So I'll go ahead and concur with that. So I see a question: how come when using the arpeggiator Cubase plugin on an external synth instrument track, the arpeggiator does not get recorded? However, I still hear it when I'm auditioning for my MIDI keyboard. So probably what you need to do is, let's say if I have the arpeggio here, so I will put this, take this out of monophonic mode. And I'll put the arpeggiator on. I think this would work the same way for internal or external MIDI. So let's say I will just do this as 16th notes. So as we just kind of have this, if we have this MIDI plugin on, I'll just solo this particular track. And as I hit play, and I'll take it off my... So when I come here, let's say I hit play, it's going to generate the arpeggio that we have set up right there. And I'll play kind of different. So... but if I recorded information and I just hold down a chord, which triggers that arpeggio, I'll add in our voice there. It's going to record the chord, but when we play this back, it gets processed again through the arpeggi. So we do this. Now, if I wanted to turn this MIDI part through the arpeggi into the actual data that we hear, that's when we would go to freeze MIDI modifiers, and that would take this particular track and we can see that change directly to the arpeggiators. Now, if I undid that and let's say recorded a new part, and then you see this little record enable icon here within the MIDI plugin. So now it will, as I record, it will just, as I hold down a chord, it's going to automatically map out the arpeggio and record the results of the arpeggio in real time. So make sure if you wanted that arpeggio to be recorded that you actually click on this little record icon here within the MIDI insert effect. And that should automatically kind of record the results of this MIDI plugin directly to the MIDI part itself. Okay. Okay, just reading through comments here. This is a nice comment from Gareth. Each like contributes towards Greg's son's Disney World fund. So, yeah, we haven't taken him to Disney yet. We're like horrible parents, but, you know, there is a pandemic. So, okay. Okay, just going through. Okay, so it says, thanks for trying to help me figure out the drum export problem. Record a lot of crazy fast skate punk bands, so sometimes there are nearly countless sliced presets. It would take forever to export each slice individually, and it takes forever to bounce and double check all the correct hit points. I'd really love some kind of update that allows me to export the MIDI from all slices before bouncing the track. What I would do is, maybe, work with, I mean, you could probably have it set up once where, if you have, a bounce track, so let's say if I have, I'll jump back to my other project here. And you may be able to do this kind of pretty quickly with track versions. So let's see if we can figure out a way of doing this with track versions. So let's say if I've done all sorts of stuff here and I have a zillion edits. So let me just... Okay, so I've done just gobs of edits. And let's say if I come here and I do just a quick bounce selection and I choose not to replace events. If we go to our pool window... All right, so this, let's look for the file. I think it's going to be this file that was probably recorded today. So let's say, okay, so let's say I will... Okay, so I'm just going to rename this. See if this makes a difference. So I'm going to call this kick bounce. And let's see if it's in our pool. Okay, so here we have the file, and what I could do now is just, maybe do a new version. And let's say we go to our pool window, we take this particular file and drag it over. So you could have kind of all of your edits here and then all of your edits as a bounce. So it could be, and if you wanted to, email me like a download project, I could see, I might be able to kind of do this as a macro. But, you might be able to kind of just treat it, with different track versions to kind of speed up your workflow with that. And then be able to just kind of do the MIDI from there, but still have your original files there. Okay, just reading through comments. Sorry, it seems like there's some people are having some little glitches with the stream today. Sorry about that. It seems like it's all kind of fine here. So okay, when exporting in real time and listening, I'm not getting a volume fader on my export anymore. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. So let's say if I wanted to do a real-time export of this file here. So I will just do maybe just a portion of it. And I will do an export audio mix down, and we'll choose to do a real-time export. Okay, let me just do a single file, and I'll so it's looking like we got the audition volume. So that seems to kind of be working as expected. This could be being routed through the control room. So let's say if my control room is deactivated. And I come here, let's say if I want to do a real-time export now. So now it looks like that gets routed through the control room. So if you don't have the control room active, you may not hear it. So make sure that, again, you come over here to your studio menu, to audio connections, and make sure that that is not set to connected, or that you have your monitors set up through the control room to activate the listen bus. And then you should be able to hear the real-time export in real time. All right, let me go through a couple different questions. Okay. Okay, I'm just going through my timeline. My chat session just shifted for me. Okay, so I think I'm close. Okay. Sorry, seeing comments about the stream not being so great today. So sorry about that. Looks like everything's okay on my end. So we'll just try to keep going. So I see a question. Any way we can view the FX instrument browser on the right pane while the full-size mixer is open? So currently, no, there isn't a way to do that. So I think what you want is the ability to just close this, is the ability to have like all of your instruments and kind of the zones here. What I've seen some people do is just kind of resize the mixer kind of like this. And this way you could have all of your effects and kind of just drag and drop. So you can say, okay, I want my delay to be here. And I could drag and drop that delay to my, mix console window, but this will not be really set up for browsing different effects and stuff. Okay, so hi Greg. MIDI loops versus .MIDI files. MIDI loops contains info about the instruments. Yes, is that across the industry, and what happens if I don't have the specific instrument when I try to load a loop? So generally, the MIDI loops are going to be. I don't know other programs that create MIDI loops. I think it could be more of a specific Cubase thing. So with the MIDI loops, what we want to do is, just have a way that particular, a MIDI loop does contain the instrument and the sound that was used for it. And that's going to be kind of unique, and it might be a bit kind of tied into the Cubase ecosystem to have all that information. But generally MIDI files, they may have a program change to play back a general MIDI file, but they don't necessarily have to comply to general MIDI specifications. A lot of times you may not have MIDI loops outside of Cubase. So it could be the actual, you may see, content that comes, specifically targeted to Cubase users that have it, but aren't necessarily intended to use with other programs as they can't read that. Okay. So it says, hi again. I bought the Elements Cubase license. I got an error entering the code into eLicenser. I deleted and reinstalled Cubase and eLicenser. I shut down the virus program. I reset my modem, but when I try to log in, I get an error called Cubase deactivated error, and it doesn't accept my license. It was asking for a USB plus license. I've downloaded the latest version of Licenser, and I'm still able, and I'm sure my license code is correct. So generally, if you buy it online or buy it in a store, you get a what's called a DAC, and that's a digital activation code. So you would go to your My Steinberg account and enter your DAC, and that would in turn give you an e-licenser number. And there's a different number of characters. So the e-licenser code would be 8 groups of 4. So it'd be 32 characters kind of broken down by 8 groups. So some of the other things that you could, work with. So make sure, and that's going to be a different number of characters than the DAC code. So a lot of times you may be entering the DAC code instead of the license code. So make sure that you've gone to your My Steinberg account and entered your DAC, and that will send you an email and show you your e-licenser code there. So if you still haven't done that, you could, reach out to us again. Okay, so just reading through different comments, questions. So I just see, will there be smooth scrolling on Mac? So I don't have any problems with smooth scrolling on my Mac. So if I wanted to just kind of jump to like a large project, so let's just open up a big project here. So it's like 90 some tracks. And just kind of scroll down to sample accuracy, to sample level. And even as we're going up and down and zooming in and out to sample level. So seems to scroll pretty smoothly for me. So I don't seem to have an issue. But check it out, see if yours is working differently. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so just seeing a comment from Millard Brown. I started years ago with Cubase 4 LE because it was free. I ended up doing an entire CD on LE5, then upgraded to 10 Pro and really wondered why I waited so long. Great program. Glad you're finding it to be just a great program. Okay. We just, we'll move on. Okay. And just on comment on multiple monitors. So Cap Tenergy music. I just use 2 4K monitors, just like having 8 monitors. That's a good point. Okay, so a question from Millard Brown. If I'm in the MIDI editor and grab the little slider to move left or right within the editor, I have trouble because it moves too quickly. Alt-Shift-Control keys don't seem to modify. Can I slow it? So let's take a look. Let's say we're in the MIDI editor here. And I'll just take this to full screen. So let's say if I just hold down my shift key, so, your shift key can kind of modify, but I don't know a way to slow it down. So if you wanted to, so you move left or right within the editor. So you could also just hold down the left and right arrows, and that will allow you to move and to select different notes. So if it's moving too fast, you could do that. So if you wanted to, that's another way to kind of navigate quickly. But if you hold down shift, the shift wheel and the shift key and use your mouse scroll wheel, that should enable you to kind of control the speed. So if you want to do it slower to navigate, so I would try maybe the shift and the scroll wheel. So in that way, you're not grabbing the slider here. So just try the shift and the scroll wheel, and you could kind of move the time to navigate. Okay, so Greg, is it possible to load SF2 files in Hallian 6? Tried it, but without success. I believe you can. I haven't tried any in a long time. But let's say if we do a new project, and let's say we have Hallian 6. I don't have any SF2 files. If you want to send a download link to some, I'd be happy to take a look at it. But I think if we just come over here to Hallian 6, and then I think if you just kind of come over here to the browser, and then that you should be able to just kind of go to your SF2 files. If you want to email me a link where I could download some, if you have some SF2 files, I'd be happy to give it a try. I don't have any on my computer to test with. All right, so we have Jay checking in from Netherlands. Good to see you on the Hangout. Okay, so I just see question. Why is the numbering of the playlist not the same as the date it was released in the playlist? So we got a request from this. I think Jan, who's on the Hangout, had sent a request about this to have the so to have the for different SEO options, like for search engine optimization, it's better to have a title rather than the date and the name of the Hangout afterwards. But recently what they've been doing, and I'll see if I could go back and change and rename it. So if you watch the last couple Hangouts where they've changed the names, they've kept the date. I think started maybe like the August 28th Hangout, where all of a sudden you'll see like one of the topics covered and it'll say August 28th, 2020. So I will try to go through and change the name of so in the future we're going to be having the date of the Hangout also included within the name, so that you could reference by date of the Hangouts, kind of at user's request. But I'll see if I can go back and change the earlier like 50 or 60 Hangouts that we've done, and change those as well. Okay, and question 2, where can I find the database of everything you cover in each Hangout? So I just kind of heard back from Ted Springman, who's on a Hangout, is kept a very meticulous list. So one of our people, I just got an email back from, and he's going to be compiling like a page where we could go, and we're going to take some of the data that Ted is painstakingly compiled. So I think we'll have a maybe like a page that you go to that will be referenced, and that should have all the different topics. But we've covered probably 5,000 questions or so in the Hangout, so we're trying to get that all available as a resource, Jay. Okay. So just saying, probably back to our earlier question, I don't have the project time on my Cubase Pro 10.5. I only see some random numbers, bitter. So if you want to send me a picture, but again, if you wanted to see the project time, you should be able to go to Studio, to Time Display, and be able to see, right click and see different time formats. I'm not sure if you're seeing SMPTE time code or samples or what type of frame rate or bars and beats, but if you wanted to send me a quick screenshot of your time display, I'd be happy. It may help me to see what the actual issue is. All right, good to see Michael from Coast Mastering. I'm doing great. It's good to see you on a Hangout, Michael. So we see question, is there a way to quantize automation? So let's go ahead, and if you want it to be exactly on the time, so let's say if I have an audio track, and I'm here, so let's say if I want this quantized point to, or this automation point to be exactly on the beat, so let's say like if we look at this and we can see that I wanted this to be exactly on measure 16 beat 1 and or set of 15-4-4-1. So I don't think we could. I'll give it a shot. I don't think that if we select it and just hit quantize and we say to quarter note, that will work. And I don't think we could do it. Like we could do quantizing as some MIDI controllers using the logical editor, but I don't think we could do it in a project logical editor. So we can't really quantize, but if you wanted to adjust a lot of these, if you go to the project and go to the project browser, here you could say, I wanted to go to audio 01 and I wanted to see all of the automation data here. So let's say if I have a number of automation points. Okay, so let's go to, I think we might be able to see it in the project browser. So at this point, we could see the automation, but we don't necessarily. So let's say I come here. So if you wanted to get like a specific point, we could just select here and say, okay, I want this to be 16.1.1.1, or whatever you want it to be. So you could change the value, but there isn't necessarily a way to, to quantize that particular automation to be on beat. As you draw in, you could choose to have it, as we see the grid here, we could, have, different parts, kind of drawn in, but you may have to go to the project browser or just change each point from the info line. So if you wanted to come here, we could just adjust accordingly for the info line. But if you wanted to do it for a number of different events, and if you select the automation event, you could just go to the next just by hitting the left, right arrow keys and navigate to each point in the automation like so. All right. How can I solo the effects only and not the dry signal? All right, so it's a great question. So let's say if we're on. So this is a really great tip for, if you wanted to really hear what's going on with your reverb. So a lot of times when we're mixing, so if I'm here, if we solo like the effects, I would hear the original source as well as the source is feeding it plus the reverb. But if I only wanted to hear this particular reverb, I would need to have the control room activated. So go to your audio connections and make sure that the control room is active and you have the outputs set to not connected. And once I'm here, we'll see this little L button. So soloing this source solos the sources and the effects, but if I click on L, I'm only hearing the reverb. So this is just a reverb. And this way you can make kind of very critical. So again, we hit solo. It's going to feed both kind of the source that's feeding it and the effect. But if you hit just the L, you only hear that particular reverb soloed. So now you could EQ. So again, solo. So solo is a source and the effect. And L just isolates just a reverb. That way you could hear exactly kind of what your reverb is doing, isolated very easily. All right, so to see a question, when will Cubase 11 be released? So, it'll be released when it's done and it's ready to be on the market. So, as soon as we know when it's going to be released, we'll probably have a hangout showing all the new features. So, but the release date hasn't been announced. Hi, Greg. When I render in place, I'm finding that the audio is rendered a bit early and I have to manually align it using the shuffle feature. Is there a quick fix for this? So I haven't really come across where it's been. So let's go ahead and give it I'll go ahead and render just a portion. So I will go ahead and just do a quick render in place on this. All right, so now if we look at it visually, you can see those look pretty dead on, so we'll listen to it. So this is the rendered part. Up until now, that was okay. And I'll go ahead and just I'll go ahead and unmute this. Up until now, and solo. That was okay. Guess all along I was so naive. So it could be, if you're processing with, so I don't notice that issue there, and that's with effects and EQ, and with also going into, the channel strip. So, so I didn't notice any particular delay there, but it could be that maybe if you notice it with a particular plugin that's doing it, that maybe that plugin is reporting the wrong latency. But it didn't seem to have that issue for me doing it like that. So let me know if I did it differently than you did. So question, will there ever be a feature for automation track versions? I've asked about that as well, so I haven't heard of any changes dealing with that. But I'll kind of reiterate the feature request again. Okay, question. I change often between connecting Cubase to my keyboard, Roland FA06 DAW control, and the normal speakers, but find it hard to change the device setup every time. Any shortcuts to make it easier? So as we do this, what you may want to do is once you go into your audio connections is just to, for your inputs and outputs and control room is just to save presets for each device. and then you could just simply, set your presets for that particular audio interface that you're currently using. So I would try to do that, and that could simplify the process. Okay, so I see a question. Is anybody taking notes for the timestamps? So generally what happens after the Hangouts, like later tonight, I'll take a break for dinner with my family. And then what I do is go back and rewatch the Hangout and do all the timestamps. So it'll usually happens within, shortly, like usually the night of the clinic here in the United States. It takes a while to do, and sometimes it might be early the next morning. So, but we'll definitely have the timestamps up within a couple of hours for that. Okay, so a question from Charles Gaskell. Hi, Greg. I'm having problems with video playback. Hanging, the audio carries on playing fine, even if it's a video created by Cubase export. Is there anything I could do to help diagnose the problem? So, make sure that you have, the latest video drivers for your, for your particular display card in your Mac or PC. So that can often help quite a bit with that. But generally it's the video's been pretty stable on my end. So, especially a video that's kind of been created by Cubase. But check, really to make sure that you have like the latest video display drivers, because those could be really critical to, video, like all of a sudden not working great to it's like, oh, it just works like a dream. So question, I made an update from Windows 10, and when I launched Cubase 10.5, soft license doesn't have enough permissions appears. Any ideas? Thanks from France. So I would just simply try to reinstall the eLicenser control center, and I think that would take care of it for you. Okay, so we have another question about when is the Cubase 11 release date. So no one's told me yet. So, but when it's ready, it'll be released. So. Okay. Okay, so question, how can I update the elements to Pro for education? So I'm not sure if you can you could try to see, there's educational, I'm not sure if you get an educational discount, going to from an Cubase Elements educational to Pro educational, because when you're buying the educational discount, the discount is applied in the educational license itself. So I'm not sure if you could upgrade to the Pro educational version. So if you wanted to upgrade to Pro, you could do that, or if you qualify for the educational discount, you could just simply buy the Cubase Pro educational version. But since you got a discount on the Elements and the Pro educational license is discounted, I don't think there's a direct upgrade path from Elements education to Pro education. So you see a question from Doug. Hey, just curious, is all MIDI with, okay, I'm sorry. Hey, is all MIDI automatically in musical mode? Just wanting to change the tempo of a track. Usually by default, MIDI tracks will be in musical mode, but there are instances where you may want, let's say you're scoring for picture, there's a, flash, and you wanted a MIDI event to always be tied to that flash. You could take any of the, there's not like a musical mode or linear mode for the parts, but MIDI tracks themselves can be set to linear or musical mode. So if you have MIDI events on a track that's set to linear mode, you change the tempo, those won't be affected. But by default, it'll be in musical mode, and those will follow tempo changes. Okay. Okay, so we have Vicky from South Africa checking in. Welcome to the Hangout. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. All right, I'm just kind of scrolling back. Yeah, so just seeing a question from about bitter, where you're saying kind of okay, just let me all right, so I think I'm almost there. Surely someone who knows how to fix my problem. I have a problem. My timer doesn't show the project time. It shows a random number. Please help, guys. So if you want to send me a picture of the random number that you're seeing, but make sure, as Gareth mentioned, that you have the primary time set to seconds, or so we covered that a couple times. I know it's probably late. You probably posted this out, before I covered it. So all right. So Vinny wants people to hit the like button, so we could do that. Okay, so see some other people trying to help Bitter with his time display. Hi, Greg. When I record or render VST MIDI tracks, their timing is a little off. Is this a buffer size issue? Generally, I haven't, it's kind of odd to have two of the same type of questions in a row, but I haven't really run into that. So let's say, if I have, I've always found it to be sample accurate, just like we just showed a couple of minutes ago. So check to make sure, it could be, I wonder, if you have plugins in your master effects, make sure that those, you could try, to disable, it could be, some plugins don't report their latency correctly. So make sure that if you have, plugins in your master effects, try bypassing that to see if it makes a difference. Or you could just click on the constrained delay compensation here in the lower left-hand corner where this will turn orange, and try to toggle that and see if that makes a difference when you're doing your rendering. But it should be exactly sample accurately in played back in sync. So okay, so I see King Bitter is his problem is all solved. So thanks for everyone chipping in and helping him. Okay. You see a comment from Millard Brown. Greg, awesome arpeggiator tutorial. Now I can finally make my hit record. Yes, we're going to hold you to it, Millard. So good luck with your next recording. All right. Okay, so Steven was nice enough and looked up the MIDI context gate and says that the primary use seems to be for dealing with MIDI guitar controllers or keyboards. So, okay. Okay, so question. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped. So question, why Cubase doesn't have a quick method of cleaning recordings like Adobe has, where you select a noise profile and use it as a reference point and all audio files selected for batch cleaning we be done. So, we could do that directly inside of Wavelab, which is kind of similar to probably, it's just an audio editor that you could use. We'll have built-in noise reduction capabilities. So, you could probably wonder why Adobe doesn't have MIDI and other DAW-like features. But here in Wavelab, which you could run kind of in conjunction, you could get to the point where you have the restore rig. So if we wanted to go to restoration, you could go to the restore rig processor here. And here you could have declicking, denoising, where you could analyze a particular sound. You could also do this very extensively using spectral layers. So if you have a noise file, you could come directly with Spectral Layers Pro probably has the best noise one. So if you wanted to go to your audio and go to extensions, you could just go to Spectral Layers and be able to do noise removal, but you could have just, very specific, where you could select, just this part of the audio. I just wanted to select that part of the audio. And when you go to, your processor, you could just say, okay, this is my registered noise. Maybe I'll do that. So those are add-on options, but that will get you, if you need to do that, those are some very effective options as well. All right, so let me just revert this project here. Okay. Okay, so just seeing Vinny's not having the slider under the event for during export. So let's take just a quick look. Okay. So also, Vinny, if make sure, I'm not sure what operating system you're running. Some stuff like that may not work in like Windows 7, but it seems like when we do the export audio mix down, that slider is there. So but if you could let us know, make sure you're running Windows 10. So okay, so I have a question. Once the activation for a license is done in eLicenser, is it automatically registered? So there's a record in your profile, but you may not be registered. The software may not be registered. So there's kind of two different processes. So I see, where's the diagnostic version of eLicenser? Always that one that works 100%. So, generally I've only had one time in the last 20 years where the latest version has caused me any problems. So I think, just running the latest version is always a great is a great option to, as a rule of thumb, to have installed for your e-licenser. Okay, so just seeing comment. Hey, Greg, shift plus mouse wheels, exactly what I was looking for to scroll left, right in the editor. All right, so glad that worked for you, Millard. Yeah, and you can do that on the main project window as well. So if you're kind of zoomed in, not only in the editors, but you could just navigate left to right using the shift and the scroll wheel, just like that. So if you wanted to kind of see, navigate your timeline that way. Hi, Greg. Question. Hi, Greg. On Cubase 10.5, is there a special setting or area where to set up the behavior and input of older external MIDI keyboards that have MIDI out, in, through? Thanks. So there's no real special area because, if you're just using it as a MIDI controller, you could, just take the out and connect that directly, into your UR22 interface. If you wanted to access and use the sounds in there, you could go to under your studio menu to your MIDI device manager. So let's say if you have a Korg 01W, we could say install device, and you can say Korg 01W here. You would define the input and output where that's connected. So we'll come over here. So we'll say this is going to be connected to our UR22 interface. So I'll just say, and now at this point, when I go to, add a MIDI track, I would choose to go to my O1W, and now that I've done that, I could select all my patches for my O1W once I've made that association. But if you're just using it as a controller, it's just going to accept incoming MIDI. So, and I'd see in the next comment, you're only using the sounds from the Steinberg VSTs. So at that point, you just take the MIDI out of your Korg into the MIDI in of your UR22. And that's all you have to do. So there's nothing really special you have to do. Just connect it and, hit the keys. Okay, so all right, so see a question from Coast Mastering, Atmos, MPEG, H360, RA, other immersive formats in future Wavelab. I haven't heard of any indication of that, but I haven't really seen what's coming in the next version of Wavelab, but I'll kind of pass it along to Timo. So I think you're also in touch with Michael as well. So, but see if we could see if Wavelab is going that direction. So. So Greg, could you please recommend Yamaha headphones that are low to mid cost for Cubase 10.5 on tight budget currently, and I'd like to spend more on getting more VSTs, but need new headphones. Thanks. So the ones that I use for all the hangouts and all my office work, I have I think it's HPH-MT8. I know other people have gotten, I think there's an MT7 and maybe an MT5 as well. So those are some of the other Yamaha headphones that you could check. But, Yamaha makes a whole range of headphones. They make a range of just about every musical instrument. So I think you'll have great results kind of even at lower end models. We'll still have kind of a great quality and will last a long time. So Questions. I'm curious how much the sample libraries change from version to version. I'm on C 10.5.2. I opened a project in C 9.5, noticed some of the different samples in loop mash, soul, hip hop, etc. So there's kind of subtle changes. I think with version 10, there was a number of additional loop content sets that came with it. So if you go from 9.5 to 10.5 and you miss 10, that there's sometimes a lot of those functions will kind of, gradually work their way in. So there's a lot of stuff that was introduced in 10. And, generally, with every version, we like to give some fresh new content for our users to work with. So some versions may have more content than others. So I see a question. So for solo effects, the control room needs to be enabled, but not needed to be used. If one doesn't use the control room, is there another way to hear on FX solos? So I think the control room, will be needed, but you don't have to necessarily have the control room be so active. You could just treat it as just the output monitor. So, just come over, so even if you're doing like an immersive aspect, you could go to the audio connections here and just duplicate these with your, you can add a monitor and just duplicate those settings and set the outputs here. And at that point, it won't even really seem like you're using control room. So you could implement the control room functionality very easily without really kind of reconfiguring your setup. So I would just, take what you have in the audio outputs for your monitors and just mimic that in the monitors for control room. And that could be kind of any configuration up to, if you're doing Atmos, that could be working. So it's really just kind of defining your outputs in a different area. So you could, and then you don't really have to use the control room to its fullest extent, but you can still have the benefit of soloing the effects. See, interesting comment. I have about 2,000 pages of manual to read before you release Cubase 11. So I'm sure I will too. So, all right. So question, I purchased Pro, and when I open up a blank track, any instrument used has clinches every sample. It's a fresh install. So it could be, if you're having like little glitches and stuff like that, it could be that your buffer is set too low would be my first thing I would check. So I would go to your studio menu to studio setup, go to your audio interface and click on a control panel and try just raising the buffer. So, when we work with a very low buffer, we get kind of immediate, lower latency, quick response, and everyone goes, oh, that makes total sense. I'll just work with a lower buffer. But as you work with a lower buffer, it makes the computer work much harder. So try raising the buffer, and that will probably eliminate all the little glitches that you're having when you play a single note in MIDI for virtual instruments. All right, so just seeing a question. Hi, Greg. Do you think Cubase Pro 10.5 comes with everything we need for mixing and mastering, or we have to use other extra plugins? Thanks. So I think that a lot, I would say that, it may not have everything for mastering. There's some things in Wavelab that comes with, like the master rig that's very specific for mastering. And it's kind of a very comprehensive mastering kind of tool with, like a suite of multiband expanders, multiband like spatial enhancers, and it's going to be like a very sophisticated EQ in there, which is very similar to frequency. So I would say for mixing that, Cubase, that you wouldn't really have to go outside for, mixing music. I would say, between, if you had Cubase and Wavelab, that you wouldn't really need third party tools other than maybe an additional color. But if if you had to do if you could definitely do, work that you wouldn't feel compromised using all the internal plugins. So, if you have Wavelab and Cubase, then I think you'd be totally fine without any compromises. Okay. Okay, so it says, hi, I'm using Novation 49 SL Mark III MIDI keyboard controller with Cubase 10.5 Pro. How can I set up this controller to control most of the functions in Cubase? So I think that there's maybe a Cubase template in there. So, but a lot of the times you could set up, most of them will have various functions so that you could say, I want to have this automatically, I want these, 8 sliders to be mapped. So many of them you'll define like a Mackie control, and I don't have the Novation controller, but you could set up like a Mackie control, and this would set up your inputs and outputs to your Novation, and that would often do the transport controls. If you wanted to, there's also like track quick controls and VST quick controls, and you could assign these to your sliders on your particular keyboard. So I could come over here and assign my quick controls. I could click learn and move the parameter, and that could automatically capture. So let's say I have this, I'm going to move my CC knob, and that will capture the particular controller. And if I wanted to go to have these particular functions, go to quick controls, we could enable, different quick controls. So when I go to my volume on this track, I could just use my 8 sliders to control kind of, known go-to parameters. So, that's a very easy thing to do. And you could set up like, I think the Novation also has, technology called AutoMap, which is like kind of like a protocol for dealing with plugin parameters. I haven't really worked with that. But I think that's a Novation thing where, it's kind of set up. But you could do with quick controls a lot of different functions. So if I wanted to come to my instrument set here, let's say just a retro log for most of the instruments. You could just right click and add, to quick control or learn CC. So I could just, move a knob, and that will automatically control that particular parameter from my MIDI controller, just like so. So it's kind of very easy to have access to all the different functions just like that. Okay. All right. So just see question. My pro version is different to what you're using. I searched latency and it says 13.129 milliseconds. So, the latency is really dependent upon your buffer size. So when you go to your studio menu to studio setup, we can come directly to our buffer size. And as we work with different buffers, sometimes it will be expressed in milliseconds, and sometimes it will be expressed in the number of samples being used in a buffer. But if you run into that, just try to raise your buffer size up and, try to increase it and see if that makes a difference for you. All right. So let's see. I think I may have caught up to our chat field. Let me just take a quick look, make sure. I know we had some questions that were submitted in advance. So let's take a look at some of those. All right, so question. When I hammer away on my keyboard recording, I get a lot of different velocity values, but I want them all to be the same. I hover over them with my mouse and get a so-and-so result, but I can't get them all to be the same in a more subtle way. So let's take a look. So let's say if I have a bunch of MIDI notes with varying velocities here. And I want these all to be one fixed velocity. So I think if we come here, let's just try this. I'll just try, see if there's a... So if you want, let's say I want these all to be one velocity, I could select all of the notes. There's a couple ways of doing this. I could hit Control A, go to the velocity value, hold down Control or Command, and type in 99. And let's say if I want it to be 100, I'll just type in 100, and then I'm going to hold down Control or Command before hitting Enter. And then it will fix it all to the same velocity. We could also do this on a logical editor. So if I wanted to go to my MIDI menu, we could choose to do logical editor. And I could say I want to take value 1 or value 2 of notes. Or let's just say I'll do this to... We want to take MIDI notes and take their value 2, which is velocity. And we could say set to fixed value. And I want it to be 88. And we want function set to transform. So now they'll all be 88. They could all be 100. So I'll hit apply. We'll see them raise. I want them all to be 50. And now hit apply, and you could save various presets for that. If you want the velocities to, like, as they've been recorded, so let's say I record some velocities here from very soft to very loud. So if I recorded different velocities and I wanted the velocity to be fixed as I record, we could do this, I believe, in an input transformer. And we could say, let's go to local. Let's activate this. So I'll say we want to take value 2. Or we'll just say MIDI notes here. And here we'll say value 2, we want to set to fixed value. And now whatever velocity I hit, and we'll set the function to transform. And we'll make sure that this is active. So as I go to record, no matter if I hit it very soft or very hard, it's going to put out the same velocity value. So I can hit it very soft, and you may be able to hear on the mic. So soft, loud, and it's going to just put out the same velocity. So if you wanted to just do that on input, you could just fix the velocity and then not have to worry about doing any editing after the fact. Okay, so we had another question sent in. My computer is used for online streaming as well as Cubase. I had one pair of headphones and one set of monitors hooked up to each of the headphone jacks in my UR44. This worked nicely for both Cubase and streaming. I'm now running through my UR22C and have to keep switching jacks between headphones and speakers. I want to run the outputs of the UR22C to the inputs of my UR44. This way I can plug my headphones into my 22C and connect 2 sets of monitors to the headphones output of the 44. The UR44 will not work without the USB plugged in. If I plug it in, it may work in Cubase since I would have to select the audio connections to be used. But when I'm outside of Cubase, how would I set my computer to decide which interface it will be going through? Alternatively, is there a way to set the UR44 to function as an external headphone amp without plugging in the USB? So if you have the UR44 set up and you have the inputs and outputs configured just using the DSP Mix FX console. So there's a little utility mixer, like the software control panel mixer called DSP Mix FX for the UR44. And what that is going to allow you to do is to just control the settings. And those settings will be preserved even if you unplug the UR44 from the interface. So, if you want to have the UR22C and the UR44 working together, you could have the UR44 as like your Windows system sounds and Cubase being output through your UR22C. You could do that. If you disconnect the USB cable entirely and you just wanted to have your UR44 as like a headphone amp, you could just do the routing inside of the DSP Mix FX software. And when you unplug the UR44 from the computer, those settings are maintained kind of like a hardware mixer. So once you have that settings and you say this input's going to this headphone, this input is going to that headphone, those settings and those routings will be preserved until they're changed either by connecting it to the computer and changing it or loading up a Cubase project. So your UR44 can work as a standalone mixer and headphone amp. Just, do the settings in the DSP Mix FX software, not in Cubase, and then those settings will be preserved for you. Okay, we also had a question from about 2 weeks ago or about a week ago about how to set up to do a round robin inside of Hallion and how to set that up with variation groups. So figured it out with the help of some of my colleagues in Hamburg. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so what I've done is I have 8 different snare samples, and I wanted to do a round robin. If you're not familiar with what a round robin is on sampling, what it allows you to do is instead of having the same sample repeated over and over again, and it's often, when people criticize some MIDI tracks of sounding like a machine gun, especially on snares, and to alternate between a set of different samples. So let's say if I come here and I have all these different snare samples. So what I've done is I've dragged these particular samples, these 8 snare samples, and we'll go to our sample mapping, and I just drag them onto one particular key. So a C2 here. So as we play different velocities, these velocities will automatically trigger different samples based on the velocity. So if I wanted to look at this part where we're going to have a number of different samples, and so I'm going to have the same samples going here with different velocities. So what we want to do is to set up kind of a round robin so that if I played the same velocities, that it would alternate between those 8 samples. So it's not going to play the same sample over and over again. So I'm going to take these 8 samples here. And what I want to do first is to make sure that all of these samples will fit all of the different velocity ranges. So I'm going to select one here. So I'll select one of the samples. And as I dragged them in, it just split it by, since we have 8 samples, it divided the 128 velocity values by 8. So I'm going to come here and say this velocity will be 0 through 127. And I'm going to kind of set this for all of the different velocity ranges for the samples. So I'll just kind of select these here just to show you how. Let's see if I get my mouse to cooperate. Sorry about that. All right, so just kind of keep doing this for all the samples. Okay. So now all these samples are kind of overlapping each other. And what we want to do after this is to create kind of a variation group. So we could select these samples and we'll go into sound. And then we're going to select all the samples and we'll go to sound and we'll see variation group. So we'll call it variation group 1. I'm going to select the program here and we'll go under variation groups. We're going to enable and we'll set variation group 1 to round robin. So as we do this, we can now play back this particular sound. It's going to have the same exact velocity, and it should do playback the different samples in a round robin. So that's how we could set up kind of variation groups and do a round robin. And where I kind of made my mistake when I was having problems kind of getting it sorted out was not having all of the samples here set to 0 through 128 in the mapping. So once you did that, then you could have the variation group so that you don't have the same sample playing back every single time, that it could go through a series of samples to have kind of more musical and natural variations. All right, let's go back to our live feed. Okay. Hi, Greg. I hope you're fine. Could you please tell us, if you can, some new features for the next version of Cubase Pro? Thanks. Even if I knew what the features were, I'd be on a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't really share new features. So, but I'm sure that the development team, all the ladies and gentlemen at Steinberg, are working really hard on coming up with exciting things. So I think patience will be worth it. So. So we have a question. Hey, is there a setting that allows you to select something on a playlist and zoom in on a selected object? For example, select MIDI block and tap H to zoom in. So let me just I'll just open up a project that might show this a little better. So let's just take a look in some of the keyboard shortcuts. So All right, I'll just look through some of the key commands under Zoom. I think there might be something, so. Let me see if this keyboard shortcuts may be being used for something else. So it says there's a zoom to event. A lot of times what I do is just kind of use just the zoom tool itself and just kind of zoom like that. And then you could just double click. If you have like different shortcuts here, so say if we're really kind of spread out, you could hit like Shift F to zoom on the event. It says Shift E for zoom to event. Let's see if there's any other keyboard shortcuts that are. Yeah, there's a zoom to event, but I'm not sure why it's kind of not active. Let's see. But nothing. So a lot of times, I use just kind of like when I'm looking, I think a zoom to event, I'm not sure. I haven't played with that particular function, but just grabbing kind of the zoom tool, I find is helpful for even if you wanted like a range to see what's going on. And then with the zoom tool, you could just double click to go directly back to where you were. So, but I'll play around and see if I get to figure out this zoom to event. All right. So we have a question, maybe off topic, just tuning in, but I have a client who wants to work in 432 hertz and not 440. Is this possible in Cubase to pitch shift the whole project? So you could do it for audio quite easily. You have to do it for MIDI instruments separately within the instrument itself. But if we have a project like this and we want it to, I'll just revert this, and we wanted to listen to this at 400, like a tuning scale of 432 as opposed to 440, I could just come here. So let's say as we're playing, and we could select all the audio events, and you'll see transpose. So I could just drop tune by semitones. But here we see a fine tune. So if you wanted to be at 432, just hit -8. And now that's at 432. So I go back to 0. So type in -8 for the value under fine tune with everything selected. Doesn't seem to make a huge difference to me sonically, so I haven't been quite convinced of the A equals 432 stuff, but you could do it if you need to. So. Okay, question. When I put a certain VSTI on an insert, I cannot open it after some time, and Cubase does not shut down properly. When I need to delete the track to remove, what can I do? So if it's a VSTI, so if it's a VST effect and you put on an insert, it's probably indicative that it's going to that it's, that plugin is causing problems. And it could be that that particular plugin has been blacklisted, but, sometimes plugins, can cause problems like that. So, and if you get to the point where you need to delete the track to remove it, if you hold down, and this is in version, in version 10.5, if you hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift on Mac right after double clicking, it'll take you into like a diagnostic mode. And one of the modes, because this is an issue that comes up a lot, is the ability to bypass all third-party plugins. So once you go into that particular mode and you bypass all the third-party plugins, you could open up the project, remove it, save the project, and then open the project again afterwards. And then that plugin won't be referenced on that particular track. So again, right after starting Cubase on Windows, hold down Alt Control Shift. On Mac, hold down Command Option Shift, and keep that held down until you get like the little safe start diagnostic mode, and choose to bypass your third-party plugins. Open a project, remove that, save it. You can save it under a different title if you want, just to be absolutely certain. At that point, open it up again, and you won't have that particular plugin being referenced. Okay. Okay, so just going through some more comments. Okay, so let's see. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to assign MIDI controllers to the remote control editor? So, I think the remote control editor is really more assigned to particular remote controls. So let's say if I come here and and if I go to a particular, let's see if I remember how to get into this. Let's say if I have an EQ, so I have my frequency. All right, and then we right click and we go to the remote control editor. So the concept of the remote control editor is to assign it to specific, controllers that you have. So this could be for, different controllers, or whether you want it to be, for a nuage, or if you're doing, System 5. But, you could come over here and see kind of the different pages of your remote control. So, I think if you just wanted to assign it to generic MIDI, I would just do it through, go to your studio setup and go to, generic remote. So if you say, okay, I want on, this fader here, this knob, I'll learn this parameter. So say, okay, I'm going to click on learn. I'll put this on channel 1. I'm going to say, we're going to take from my Nectar controller. I'm going to click on learn. So we're going to say MIDI 32. And I want to control in the VST mixer. Let's say my stereo out. And I wanted to control the insert 1 frequency. And I wanted to, go to, let's say, EQ1 frequency. And so now when I come over here, I could just assign that particular function. Let's say I go to this, I have band 1. And now I could just move my knob, and that's controlling that particular aspect. You could also go to your quick controls, which we discussed a little bit earlier, and click on learn. and move a particular function. And now my quick controls are just controlling that particular function. So if I wanted to go to another parameter, I could say, okay, let's go to the frequency here. So I'm blowing off Dweezil Zappa for you guys. So he's calling now. And then I could just simply move that parameter, move that EQ parameter, move this EQ parameter together, just kind of like that, and have control. So, you probably don't need to use a remote control editor for doing generic MIDI stuff, but it's really intended more for Nuage, Yukon controls to define those. Okay. Question, trying to find out how to save a rack VST instrument with multiple assigned outputs as a track template. All right, so let's give it a shot. So let's say I will have, let's say maybe a drum instrument. Okay, and within my drum instrument, okay, so it says it's going to be a rack instrument, so let me redo that. Okay, so I will take a look at this. So let's say if I go to my mixer and I have these routed to different outs. All right, and we can see that this will be, those outputs are now activated. All right, so I want to save all of these together. So let's see if I save this as a track preset. Or I'll just come here, I'll choose to export selected tracks. I will now hit OK. We'll call this multi-out rack. And I will save it into my Hangouts folder. Close that project and let's go to new project, do an empty, and we will import selected, we'll import a track archive. So you export selected tracks, you import a track archive. All right, let me just see if I put it somewhere. See if where I saved it to. That I saved it into this folder. Oh, here's our multi-out rack. Sorry about that. We'll hit open. So I'm not sure if that carried over all the outputs, but we'll go ahead and open up the instrument and see. So I think if you wanted to do that you need to work with the instrument tracks, because that will take that particular part. So I think you need to work with instrument tracks, but I know that could kind of be a bummer. That doesn't kind of work as expected. Hey, Greg, do you know when Cubase will add a strumming feature to the piano roll, or could you tell them to add one? So, yeah, I've kind of mentioned it, that it could be a little easier if they came up with something a little more obvious. Okay, so I see Andy Gardner saw the round robin, so he's the one that asked for it, so... All right, so there's a couple of things you could do for strumming. One is just to have different, MIDI patterns in the arpeggiator. So let's say if I wanted to go directly to, let me just open up like a instrument track here. So, there's different ways of doing some strumming functionality. So let's try going to Howling Sonic. And I think if we just go here, we might have some kind of strumming capabilities. Okay, so... Sorry, my computer came unplugged. Give me just a second, see if I could. All right, so if I wanted to just... Let me see if it's an octave. Okay, so some of the different picking patterns here. So if I, so we could just kind of take these. Let me see if I can find. All right, so I could just kind of hit record and. All right, and now let's say I stop record, and I think we could just drag over. So let's say if I... Okay, so I could just take over that particular pattern right there. So let's say I listen to this. So if you have like different patterns, now we could just take these into like MIDI inserts. And if you go to like Apache SX, so you could take these different patterns, and I'll just move this out of the way. And you can see a sequence, and you could actually just drag and drop your own sequences. I'll just make this always on top. So I could take just this one particular chord pattern and just drag it as a sequence and be able to and you could just do like, different sequences as arpeggiators as well. Now, once you're kind of in parts, a lot of times people miss, like some of the guitar strumming stuff that you could do with the trim tool. So if you want to, if you have like block chords, you could just use the trim tool here and say, okay, I just want to to cut there, or if you hold down the Alt key, so if everything is like that, you can say I want those to be more strummed. So, there's some other functions, but it's not kind of like an automatic guitar chord. And, I think programs to do that, everyone is using kind of the same guitar chord patterns, which is kind of a dead giveaway for a lot of stuff. Okay, so hello again. How do I set multiple instruments to play at once on Halligan Sonic SE3? Please show me how. So, if you wanted to create like a monster layer, it's really easy. We go to Halligan Sonic SE. Click on Add Track. So let's say, okay, I wanted an electric piano. So let's say... All right, and then let's say in channel 2, I wanted to have, let's say, keyboard, and let's say I want a harpsichord. So I will come over here, layer that. Let's put an organ. So I want a drawbar organ. I wanted this sound. I want it to have, let's say, strings. Why not? So let's say classic string machine. So we'll have like an arp string ensemble, or let's do like a synth pad. And let's do maybe a vocal thing. All right, I'll go back to my synth pad and we'll drop something else in. All right, so I have all these different sounds. So let's say strings. I have an organ. I have kind of a synth harpsichord and piano. So if I wanted these all to be layered together inside of Halligan Sonic SE, I just put them all to MIDI channel 1. So as we do this, and now as I play, and if you wanted to change like the octave, so I wanted this vocal bending to be down an octave, we'll just say -12. So you could just... So, they can all be put out to 16 independent MIDI channels, but if you wanted to just stack them, and you could also say, I only wanted this particular keyboard to come in on this range, or only within these velocity values. So say, and I want this keys to only come in, let's say, for those particular octaves. So you can create a pretty massive synth layer, and you can kind of do the same thing in Halligan Sonic or Halligan as well. So, all right, let's see if we have more questions. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, so we have Chris checking in from Palm Springs, California. All right, so See a comment from Jeff. Hang on, I think my son's knocking on the door. Bear with me just a second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about the interruption. All right, so yeah, just saying a great comment from Jeff. The real oboist should always want A equals 440. Try making an oboe read, and after 10 years, you'll be able to figure out why we need a 440. Yeah, so I'm kind of an A440 guy myself, so I find it fascinating people looking at A432 with sand and saying it sounds better. So we have a question. Can you also do sound design in Cubase, just like you do sound design in Nuendo? Yeah, certainly. So, a lot of people will just kind of, Nuendo has great sound design functions, but a lot of those are applicable in Cubase as well. So if you wanted to come over here, find kind of like an atmospheric kind of sound. So let's say we have that, and if you want it to, even take just a portion of the sound. So as you come to select, you could actually just even take just, small portions of it. You could come over here, while it's playing and say, I want to do different sound design aspects using, the direct offline processing for different functions. Like, okay, I want this to pitch shift down over time. So I could just come directly here. So all my sound designer friends just love that you could just kind of take your pitch shift and, just apply that in real time and say, okay. And let's run that through an effect. So let's say, okay, I want to run that through like maybe a flanger as well. So let's come here and say, okay, I want this to be. And I wanted to take this portion of it and choose to reverse that. So we could just kind of do. And now I want to take this and invert the phase. So there's a lot of really creative sound design stuff that you could do. And then if you wanted to even, just take a particular file into the sampler, at this point you could just right click and say create sampler track. And now you could just kind of play. So, just come here, select this and run through filters, so any audio that you want. So just some easy, simple sound design stuff that you do to be very creative inside of Cubase. So. Okay, so just see comment. Nice. I never knew you could drag MIDI from inside of Hallion. Hallion Sonic 3. Yep, you can just do that for all of the different arpeggiators if you want. Okay, so see, question, hi, how could I route a sample or instrument to a reverb and delay so that the reverb send ducks doesn't play when the actual sample plays, i.e. snare plays one channel and reverb delay on separate. So if I had to solo snare effects, reverb delay channel, there would be silence at the time the actual snare would play. So let's go ahead and set up the scenario. So let's say if I just wanted to find some snares. Okay. All right, just turn my snap on and I'll try to come here. Okay, so let's say I have some just snare hits here. Okay, so let's say I want to create an effects channel track. So I'm going to create a track here. All right, so let's say I want reverb on it. So we'll have our one snare being fed out to our sends. Okay, so let's go to my effects send here. So we'll go to my effects return. I'll open this up and let's move that down and let's just put, I think some guys will just do this and I'll put just a compressor with a side chain. And the input is the snare track. So let's see if I can remember the trick. I think sometimes you want to put the, so let's say we're sending, so I know some guys will kind of do some creative routing like that. Let me just, And then just kind of like what we showed a bit earlier, like if you wanted to, and if you want to do this with, instead of just, some of the plugins themselves will have, so I go to my effects chain here and you go to inserts. Something else that you could do is just be able to route this. Here, let me just select that. I will come, and without doing this, some of the effects that you could have are also like if you do the multi-tap delay, here you could just duck you have a ducker built in to the multi-tap delay that you can have access to there. But it says if you had to solo the snare, there would be silence at the time the actual snare would play. So you could do some stuff like that and play around with it. Some people will also just, route the reverb to different sources. So if I say, like, I have this going to, let's say, I'll quickly add this. So I will take this track. I'm going to add 2 group channels. Hang on just one second. My son's knocking on the door. All right, sorry about that. Got the batteries in for my son. All right. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on. Okay. Okay, so going back to our Halion Sonic SE3, how do you send or set different output channel on multiple instruments? So, if you wanted to go to different outputs, let's say if I still have this loaded up here, so if I have all of these set, and we wanted to route these to individual outputs, all you have to do is go to mix, and then you could have 16 stereo outputs for each one of the Halion Sonic voices. So you could run it through different effects if you need to, but also realize that you have a lot of built-in effects. So at this point, we can now do, your 6 or 7 or 16 individual stereo outs. So question, how important is sidechain? So, for different music, if you're doing like dialogue stuff, and sidechain's important because every time that someone comes in and sings, you could have the music track go down. You could also, for like doing a lot of EDM music, like the bass and it being sidechained from a kick is kind of an essential part of the music. Is an essential part of the genre as well. Okay. So Jeff is just going back, interesting comments about tuning, about LPs that were MMO, music -1, had tuning notes, but many turntables did not have pitch control. I had a Sony Dual Deck with pitch control and a Technique CD player with digital pitch control. If you didn't live in the 60s and 70s, and weren't an oboist or pianist, the intonation was all over the place. These days, being digital, pitch is way more universally consistent than ever before. A equals 432 is more of a Baroque era pitch. Violin strings were gut, softer, and weaker, but beautiful in that era. So, yeah, those are all great points. Okay. So, see, I think I may have gotten to the end of all the questions. I know we had some people that had some connection problems today. It seemed like the stream was a little glitchy for some people, so I apologize for that. Seems like everything is fine kind of on the transmission end here. But let me know. We'll just wait a couple minutes and see. We could maybe end 10 minutes early if there's no more questions. I'd like to thank everyone for all their help. I know we have a lot of people that pitch in and help other people, like Gareth, and we have Agent K that does moderation when needed. We also have Jazz Dude, lots of people that are, able to help out as I'm catching up to the timeline. So I appreciate that. We'll be doing another one of these Hangouts on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. I'll wait to see if there's any more questions before we wrap up. If not, we'll wrap up a couple minutes early. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions that were asked, and we will get started. Okay, we have someone telling me to wait. We'll see if there's another question coming in. All right, I see. Okay, someone told me to wait, and it says, "Oh, nothing. I have nothing smart to ask." Okay, and I see Agent K says Greg deserves a trophy for reaching the end of the comments. Okay. With that, I will go ahead and I guess we'll wrap up. I'll wait just another. I know there's a bit of a delay from when I talk to when you guys hear, so we'll wait and see. But if everything is, I'll wait just another couple seconds, and if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for great questions. We want everyone to stay safe and healthy. And we'll see you on the Hangout this upcoming Friday. And if you've learned something, make sure that you hit the like button. Okay, so I see just the last minute question here. Is it possible to select an area, for example, with the locators for the direct offline processing and create an audio event in this region? So if you just used a range selection tool, so let me just, so if I wanted to just do just a particular portion of the file, all I'd have to do is we'll just select the range selection tool and say, hit F7. And at this point, I could just, let's do a stereo flip. And that would do it just on that particular section. So whatever I have selected here, I could choose to do processing on just that particular region. So if I want to come here, do a process of a fade out, I could just do it directly on that particular region. Okay, so we have a question. Where is the setting to import expression maps for Iconica Ensemble library? So I don't think I have the Iconica working on mine, but all you have to do with any of the Hallian instruments to import the key maps is, so let's say if I just come here to my instrument track, I'll go to, let's say Hallian 6 or Hallian Sonic, doesn't matter, it would be the same. So we do the same thing with HSO here. So let's say I want it. So I have all the different key switches here. And then within, all I had to do is, once we're in the editor, just come over here. Let's just quickly add a part, double click the part. We're in the editor, go to the expression map and just say import key switches. And then all of the key switches for the library will just show up directly there. All right, let's see if there's any last minute questions. All right, so I guess we'll wrap up before we lose we'll do 8 minutes early. So we're glad that everyone has learned something new. If you learned something new, please feel free to hit the like button, and we'll see you on Friday. Take care. Be safe.